There are certain patients who, no matter how much effort you put into treating them, never seem to get better. It's almost as if something darker is at work, something that the human eye can't see. Dr. Sharma, a seasoned physician at a quiet hospital on the outskirts of town, had seen his fair share of strange cases, but this one was different. He remembered the patient, a middle-aged man who had been admitted with no clear diagnosis. The man had arrived late one evening, his body pale, his movements slow and stiff. Despite his symptoms, the test returned nothing. No signs of infection, no signs of anything really. He wasn't sick, yet he wasn't well either. For all intents and purposes, he was just there, a patient who existed in a limbo, never truly needing treatment, but never improving either. The hospital had been busy, as it always was, and the doctors moved on to more pressing matters, leaving the man to his own strange, invisible suffering. Dr. Sharma had been called in more than once to check on the man, but each time he found him staring at the ceiling, unblinking, unresponsive. The nurses said he was simply restless, that he kept tossing and turning, though his vitals remained stable. In fact, they all found it odd. The man never complained, never asked for anything. He didn't even speak, just stared, motionless, like an abandoned doll. The night shifts became routine, and the mystery of the patient faded into the background as hospital life continued. That was until one particular night, when a nurse named Priya was assigned to his ward. She had heard the whispers from the other staff members about the strange patient, who never seemed to be truly alive or dead, but she brushed it off. Everyone in the hospital had their quirk, but that night, Priya would experience something that would haunt her forever. It was nearing midnight when she went in to check on him. The hallway lights flickered as she walked down to his room, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. As she opened the door, the silence hit her first. It wasn't the usual silence of a hospital at night, but a heavy, oppressive stillness, like something was waiting, watching. She glanced at the patient, lying still in his bed, his eyes wide open but unblinking, staring into the dark ceiling. Priya noted that his skin had a deathly pallor to it, even more so than usual. His chest rose and fell, so slowly, it almost seemed unnatural. As she stepped closer, she hesitated for a moment, noticing the faint scent of something unpleasant in the air. She placed her hand on his wrist to check his pulse, and that was when she realized there was no pulse. The man was dead. Her heart raced as she stepped back, uncertainty creeping up her spine. She checked for any signs of life, but there was nothing. He was lifeless, dead. Priya stood frozen for a few moments, the weight of the realization sinking in. She reached for the call button, her finger trembling as she pressed it to notify the doctors. But just before she could turn away, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The patient's mouth twitched, then slowly stretched into a grotesque, unnerving smile. It wasn't a smile of comfort, but one of sinister amusement, as though he knew something she didn't. Before Priya could even react, the smile vanished, and the man's body seemed to shift under the sheets. His eyes blinked, and in an instant, he was awake, staring directly at her, with an intensity that made her feel as though she was being hunted. A cold shiver ran down her spine. His body moved with a jerk, unnatural and stiff, and his eyes locked onto her. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of her breath, sharp and quick, filling the silent room. Then, without a word, he slowly whispered, "Help me." His voice was not human. It was rough, hoarse, like the rasp of someone who hadn't spoken in years, but it was unmistakably his. Priya stumbled back in horror. She didn't know what to do. Was this a prank? Was it some trick of the mind? An illusion brought on by the night's exhaustion? But she could feel the terror growing in her chest. The man, who had just moments before been clinically dead, was now alive, and his gaze was full of something dark, something that spoke of knowledge no one should ever possess. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt as though the walls of the room were closing in on her. As she turned to run, the lights above her flickered violently, the cold air thick with an eerie energy. The hospital had never felt more oppressive. Priya rushed to the door, but it wouldn't open. The handle turned in her hand, but it felt as though something was holding it closed on the other side. Panic gripped her, and she slammed her shoulder into the door, trying to force it open. It finally gave way, and she stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath. But when she looked back, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The patient was standing at the doorway, watching her, still with that same twisted, unholy smile. As she ran down the corridor, the air around her grew colder, and the lights above her flickered even more violently. The familiar hospital halls felt unfamiliar now, alien and hostile, as though they were twisting into something unrecognizable. The soft, distant sound of rough breathing echoed down the halls, but when Priya tried to look around to find its source, there was no one in sight. She sprinted to the nurses' station, but when she arrived, the nurses were all staring at the monitors, their faces pale as though they too could feel the weight of the building's strange energy. Priya managed to catch her breath, her hands shaking. "The patient, he's awake," she managed to stutter. The nurses stared at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "The patient in room 304, one of them asked. Priya nodded, but the nurse's face went pale. "That man has been dead for 3 days. Priya's heart dropped into her stomach. That wasn't possible. She had just spoken to him. He had just looked at her, alive, smiling. It didn't make sense. She ran back to room 304, her mind racing. But when she opened the door, the bed was empty. There was no sign of the patient, no trace of his presence. She checked the charts, the records, but everything said the same thing. The patient had died days ago. The hospital never spoke of him again. The staff refused to acknowledge the incident, but Priya couldn't shake the feeling that something had been released that night, something that couldn't be contained, and she knew deep down that the patient was still out there waiting, watching, with that terrible smile, ready to come back whenever the darkness called him. Hospitals are strange places. They are filled with life, but also with an unsettling kind of silence. You never know when the quiet moments are hiding something far darker. I never believed in ghosts or spirits until I started working at this hospital. It was an ordinary place, or so I thought, the kind of hospital where people came in with illnesses, and most of them left, some healed, some not. But there was one patient who never left. A patient no one ever spoke about, except in whispers, the doctor they called Dr. Singh. Dr. Singh had a reputation. He was experienced, wise, and a trusted figure in the hospital. He was the kind of doctor everyone respected, and in many ways feared. But when I first joined, something strange caught my attention. I had heard all the stories about him before I started, how he had been working here for decades. Yet, when I tried to meet him, something always seemed off. His office was always locked, and no one seemed to know where he actually was. People would say he was in the hospital, and yet, whenever I walked into his office, it was empty. His desk was always covered in papers, patient files stacked high, but no signs of him. I started to wonder if maybe he was some kind of ghost, a figure whose presence was only felt, never seen. Curiosity got the best of me. One late evening, the hospital was quiet, with only a few night shift workers around. I decided to take a risk and check Dr. Singh's office once again. As I approached his door, the air felt colder, the silence heavier. I knocked softly, then tried the door. It opened with ease, much to my surprise. The office was dark, the only light coming from the hallway outside. Inside, nothing seemed out of place, yet everything felt wrong. His desk was cluttered with paperwork, but there was no sign of him. It was as though he had never been there. even though the papers were recent, marked with the date. I picked up one of the files, scanning the notes quickly. Most of it was medical jargon, but then something caught my eye. A note scribbled at the bottom of the page. It read, "The patient is ready for discharge, but something feels wrong." I froze, my blood running cold. Who was this patient? Why did it feel like that note was meant for me? Before I could make sense of it, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway. I immediately put the file back and rushed out of the room, but when I looked down the hall, no one was there. The footsteps stopped as suddenly as they had started. The unsettling feeling only grew stronger. What had just happened? Was I losing my mind? The next day, I spoke to some of the more experienced nurses. I asked about Dr. Singh, trying to gather more information, but their responses were strange. They spoke about him in hushed tones, their eyes shifting nervously as they spoke. One of the older nurses said, "Dr. Singh, he's been around for years, but no one really sees him anymore. He just appears when he's needed." Another added, "I've heard things, you know. He never leaves the hospital." Not really. Some people say he's still here, trying to fix something from the past. Fix something. That's when the pieces started to fall into place. But the picture they created was far from clear. As I delved deeper into the hospital's history, I uncovered an unsettling truth. Years ago, Dr. Singh had been involved in a tragic case. A young girl had died under mysterious circumstances while in his care. The details were sketchy, but it was clear that something had gone horribly wrong. The hospital had been sued, but the case was quietly dismissed, with no clear explanation. Singh was never held responsible, but some of the old staff whispered that the truth had been buried. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a mistake that cost someone their life. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why was Dr. Singh still here? Why did no one ever see him? Why did no one ever see him? The more I asked, the stranger things became. I began hearing rumors, stories from those who had worked with him. They all told the same thing. He was a figure of the past, a doctor who had been involved in something that had never been fully explained. A ghost, a spirit, a doctor trapped in a cycle of guilt and regret. One night, as I worked late, I overheard two doctors talking in the break room. I had never seen them before, and they seemed uncomfortable as they spoke. "Have you seen him lately?" one of them asked. "Dr. Singh," the other replied. "No, but I hear he's been walking the halls again, like nothing's changed. He's still here, isn't he?" There was a long silence before the first doctor spoke again. "It's not really him. It's his spirit, his soul. He's been stuck here ever since the accident. He can't leave until he makes things right." That was the moment I realized the truth. Dr. Singh wasn't just an old doctor who had retired or disappeared. He was something else, something that could never leave. His spirit, tied to the hospital because of the mistake he made all those years ago, was now wandering the halls. The young girl, the tragedy, he had never been able to move on. He was here, trapped in the same place, unable to escape the weight of his guilt. I had to see it for myself. One final time, I went to his office. This time, I didn't knock. I opened the door and stepped inside. The room was colder than I remembered, the air thick with an oppressive stillness. And there he was, Dr. Singh. But something was wrong. He was standing by the desk, facing away from me. The way he stood, rigid, lifeless, made my heart race. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. Then slowly, he turned to face me. His eyes, empty, hollow, looked right through me. "I can't fix it," he whispered. "I couldn't save her. I couldn't save anyone. And now I am the one who can never leave." The room grew darker, and I felt the air pressing down on me. Dr. Singh's figure began to fade, his body dissolving into the shadows. "I will never be discharged," he muttered. his voice echoing in the silence. And just like that, he was gone, vanished. The room returned to its cold emptiness, and I was left standing there, alone, unable to comprehend what I had just witnessed. I never returned to that hospital after that night. The memory of Dr. Singh, the ghost of the doctor who could never leave, still haunts me, and every time I think about him, I hear his voice in the back of my mind. I can never be discharged. They say silence in a hospital means peace, but in some corners, it hides secrets that never died. When I first joined as a nurse at St. Martha's Hospital, I thought the night shifts would be peaceful. The halls would be quieter, the pace slower, and the patients asleep. But I was wrong. There was a particular ward in the East Wing that always felt strange. It was the pediatric ward, but that part had been closed for years after the funding ran out. Still, sometimes while walking past it during my rounds, I would hear the soft, muffled sound of a baby crying. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe it was a newborn in another ward, or just my ears playing tricks on me. But then, it happened again and again, always at the same time, around 3 in the morning, a soft wail, like a baby in pain. I asked a few other staff members if they heard it too, but most shrugged it off. Some just avoided answering. Only one senior nurse looked at me with a strange mix of concern and fear. "Do not follow the sound." That only made me more curious. The next night, when I heard the crying again, I decided to walk toward the old pediatric wing. The doors were locked, but not hard to push open if you really tried. Inside, the place was dark and smelled like rusted metal and disinfectant. The cribs were still there, covered in dust. Toys lay forgotten on the floor, and then I heard it, the crying, louder now, almost like it was right next to me. I turned around fast, expecting to see someone, anyone, but the hallway was empty. The sound stopped immediately. My heart was racing. I left the wing quickly and did not return that night, but I could not stop thinking about it. Over the next week, I started asking questions, quietly, carefully. Most of the newer staff had no idea what I was talking about, but one of the older janitors, Mr. Bhaskar, pulled me aside and told me that the pediatric wing was shut down after a terrible incident almost 15 years ago. A woman had brought her baby in for a checkup. Something seemed off about her, but no one could quite explain what it was. She would talk to herself, sometimes argue with someone who was not there. The doctors noted her behavior and flagged it, but before anything could be done, she vanished with her baby. They found her 2 days later in one of the supply closets. She had taken her own life. The baby was not with her. When the police searched, they found the baby's body in the storage room freezer, wrapped in a hospital blanket, lifeless. The woman had killed her own child before taking her own life. It was said she believed the baby was not hers, that it was a demon sent to torment her. The case was quietly handled, the wing shut down, and no one spoke about it again. But some said the baby's cries never really stopped. I could not get that story out of my head. I began digging through old hospital records, quietly sneaking into the archives during my breaks. It took me a few nights, but I finally found it. A single file, half burned and barely readable, marked with the mother's name Reena and her daughter, Asha. There were notes in the margins from a doctor, someone trying to get her evaluated for mental health treatment, but the paperwork was delayed, missed, forgotten, and then it was too late. I stared at the baby's photo in the file. She looked so small, so innocent. I do not know why, but that night, I felt a strange pull toward the old ward again, like something wanted me to understand, to see something. So I went. One last time. The ward was colder than usual. The crying started almost as soon as I stepped inside. This time it did not sound like it was in pain. It sounded angry, sharp, piercing. I followed it slowly down the hallway until I reached the last room. It was the one they used for storage, according to the old floor map. The door creaked open. Inside was dark, but I could see the outline of a crib in the corner, and something was moving. I stepped closer, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The crib was empty, but then suddenly, the crying stopped. The silence hit me like a punch. I turned around and saw her, a woman standing at the doorway, wearing a hospital gown, her hair tangled, her face pale and twisted with rage. Her eyes locked on mine. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, the room filled with the sound of a baby crying, deafening, surrounding me. I could not move. I could not breathe. Then, just as quickly as it started, it stopped. She was gone. The room was empty again. I ran out, heart hammering in my chest, and did not stop until I reached the nurse's station. I tried to tell someone, but no words came. I went home that morning and called in sick for a week. When I returned, I avoided the East Wing completely, but something had changed. Other staff started mentioning strange things, hearing a baby laugh in the elevator, feeling cold spots near the pediatric wing, lights flickering every night at exactly 3 a.m. And then, a new nurse went missing. Her last known location, the old pediatric ward. They found her 2 days later, in the same supply closet where Rena had taken her life. The same look of horror frozen on her face. Her report, the one she had started writing before she died, was found on her clipboard. It only had one sentence: she wants her baby back. After that, the hospital sealed off the entire East Wing permanently. No one goes there now, but sometimes, on quiet nights, I still hear the crying, distant, echoing, waiting, and I wonder if Rena still wanders those halls searching for her child, or maybe the child is still there, waiting for her mother to come and finish what was never truly done. Either way, one thing is clear: not every patient in this hospital was ever truly discharged. Some patients leave the hospital when they are cured. Others stay behind, even when they are not supposed to. It was my 4th month as a night shift nurse in a private hospital on the edge of the city. The kind of hospital where silence ruled the hallways and the hum of machines was the only sound after midnight. Most nights were quiet, with a few emergencies here and there, but nothing truly unusual. That was until I was assigned to Wing C, the oldest part of the hospital that barely saw any patients anymore. They only kept a few long-term cases there, and even those were moved out when renovation began on the new wing. I remember feeling a strange heaviness in the air that night, like the lights were just a little too dim, and the walls too close. I brushed it off as tiredness, and went about checking charts. That is when I saw her for the first time. Room 309. No one was supposed to be in that room, but as I passed by, I noticed the door slightly ajar, and the dim overhead light flickering inside. I paused, unsure. The nameplate outside read, "No patient assigned," but curiosity pulled me in. The bed was made, sheets tucked tight, but someone was sitting at the edge. A woman wearing a hospital gown, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Her head was slightly tilted down, hair long and black, hanging like a curtain on both sides. I asked her softly if she was all right, thinking maybe a patient had wandered from another ward. She did not respond. I stepped a little closer and repeated myself. That is when I noticed it. There was no face, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth skin, stretched tightly from forehead to chin, like someone had pressed clay over where a face should be and left it to dry. My heart froze. I stumbled backward, the chart in my hand falling to the floor with a sharp crack. In that moment, she slowly lifted her head to where I imagined her eyes would be, and just stared. Or rather, I felt her stare. A deep, cold stare that filled me with a fear I cannot explain. I ran. I did not wait to understand. I left the room and reported it to the attending doctor, who looked at me like I had lost my mind. He assured me there was no one assigned to that room, and that maybe I had been overworked. He suggested I take a break and walk outside. I nodded, but I knew what I saw, and I knew it was real. For the next few days, I avoided that wing. I stayed busy, working extra shifts in the emergency department, just to keep away from that hallway. I even started to convince myself it was some strange hallucination. Maybe the mind really does play tricks in the dead of night. But then came the second sighting. This time, it was Mira, one of the most practical and unshakable nurses I knew. She had never believed in ghost stories or superstition. One night, I found her sitting quietly in the break room, pale as paper, her hands shaking. When I asked her what was wrong, she looked up at me and whispered, "Room 309. My heart sank. She said she had gone in to check after hearing noises and found a woman standing near the window, and just like me, she thought it was a patient at first until she saw the face, or the lack of one. We tried to tell the higher-ups, but no one believed us. They even sent a security guard to check the room, and of course, he found it empty. Clean bed, lights off, nothing unusual. But strange things started happening around that wing. Machines would beep even when unplugged. Lights would flicker violently in the middle of rounds. Once a call bell rang repeatedly from room 309, even though no one was assigned there, and the entire panel had been deactivated weeks ago. Mira and I started keeping track of the sightings. Over 2 weeks, 3 other staff members reported seeing someone move past the hallway window at odd hours. One even claimed she saw a woman slipping quietly into the storeroom, but when she followed, it was locked from the outside. We were terrified, but curious. Who was she? Digging into old patient records became an obsession. We went through handwritten logs stored in a forgotten file cabinet in the basement. And that is when we found her. Rekha Sharma, admitted 15 years ago. No photo, no discharge summary. She had been brought in after a major trauma incident, facial disfigurement. So severe, they listed her under unidentified until someone claimed to be a relative. Treatment records were incomplete. What was strange was that her name kept appearing on nurse rosters even after her file was marked as deceased. 3 months after her supposed death, a night nurse had written a strange note in her report. Patient Rekha seen near ICU hallway at 3:42 a.m. No record of discharge. Possible confusion. Will follow up. But there was no follow-up. The nurse had resigned the next day. It all started to make sense. The woman with no face, the feeling of being watched, the unexplainable events in Wing C. Rekha had never left. Maybe she had not even died. Maybe she had just disappeared into the system, buried under paperwork and forgotten by everyone except the few who still worked the night shift. Mira could not take it anymore. She quit the very next week. I stayed. I do not know why. Maybe I wanted answers. Maybe I just could not believe something like this could exist without explanation. But last week, something changed. A new nurse came running to me, panic in her voice. She said she had seen a woman hiding behind the curtain in room 309. When I reached, the room was empty, but there was a handprint on the glass window. Not a normal handprint. It had no fingers, just a flat, smooth palm pressed against the glass like skin, without bone. That was the last time I went near that room. Management has since sealed it off, citing renovation delays. But I know better. I know she is still there, walking the halls quietly, hiding in corners, watching the ones who dare to come too close. They say hospitals are places of healing, but some wounds go too deep. Some patients are never discharged, and some faces are never meant to be seen again. Every hospital has a story no one talks about, a hallway that feels colder, a room the staff avoids, and a name that disappears from every record but never from memory. It was a slow Thursday night shift when Nurse Aisha noticed something strange in the eastern wing of City Central Hospital. She had worked there for 5 years and had memorized every hallway and every room by now. But that night, as she was doing her usual rounds, she noticed a door that had never been there before. It was old, chipped at the edges, and had a rusted metal plaque that simply read Room 302. The odd thing was, Room 302 did not exist. The hospital's layout only went up to 301. Aisha stared at it for a while, thinking maybe she was just tired or stressed, but curiosity got the better of her. She walked up to the door, feeling a strange chill creep up her spine as her fingers touched the cold handle. It opened with a groan, the kind that echoes long after the door has stopped moving. Inside was a room that looked untouched by time. The air was thick with the scent of old medicine and something else she could not quite place. There was a single bed in the center, white but yellowed with age. Beside it sat an old metal chair, and in that chair sat a patient. He was thin, bones pressing against pale skin, his hospital gown so faded it was nearly colorless. His eyes were closed, but his chest rose and fell slowly. Aisha stood frozen for a moment. She had not heard of any patient being kept in this wing, let alone in a forgotten room. She stepped inside, heart pounding in her ears. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, she felt like she had entered somewhere she should not be. The temperature dropped sharply. She reached for the light switch, but it sparked and died. The only light came from the hallway behind her. She took a cautious step forward and spoke softly. "Sir, are you all right?" The patient did not move. She tried again. This time his eyes shot open. They were gray, not dull or tired, but a strange stormy gray that seemed to see right through her. Aisha stumbled back, nearly dropping her clipboard. The man smiled, then, not a warm smile, not even a mad one. It was the kind of smile that makes your skin crawl. She asked again who he was and what he was doing there. He tilted his head slowly and whispered a single sentence, "I was never discharged." Aisha blinked. She reached for her pager to call security or another nurse, but the device was dead. No signal, no power, just static. She looked back at the man, but the chair was now empty. Her breath caught in her throat. The bed sheets were now stained red, as if soaked in old blood. She turned to leave, but the door she came through was gone. The wall stood smooth and solid, as if there had never been an exit. Panic started to rise. She banged on the wall. She screamed, but no one came. She turned around again and saw that the bed was no longer in the center of the room. It was now pushed to the corner, and on it lay a figure covered in a white sheet. Her own name tag was pinned to the chest. Aisha backed away, shaking her head in disbelief. This is a nightmare. This cannot be real. But as she looked closer at the walls, she noticed something even more horrifying. The names of people carved deep into the plaster. Dozens of them, all nurses, all doctors. Some names she recognized, staff who had suddenly stopped showing up, people everyone assumed had moved to other hospitals. Her own name was freshly carved at the bottom. She fell to her knees, heart racing, trying to make sense of it all. That was when she heard the whispers, dozens of them, all around her, some angry, some weeping, some simply repeating the same line again and again. He was never supposed to die here. He was misdiagnosed, mistreated, forgotten. The story came together like pieces of a puzzle. Years ago, a patient had been admitted in critical condition. He was transferred between departments, lost in paperwork, and finally left in an isolation room after being wrongly diagnosed. By the time they realized their mistake, he had died alone, screaming for help that never came. The hospital, to avoid scandal, erased all records of him. No file, no death certificate, nothing. But something had stayed. A presence, a rage that had festered in the silence. And now, it was taking revenge. Slowly, patiently, one staff member at a time. Every few months, someone would disappear. No one questioned it too deeply. Hospitals are busy. People come and go, but they were not leaving. They were being taken, trapped in room 302. A room that does not exist on any map. Except now, it exists for Aisha. She tried everything to escape. She screamed until her voice was raw. She tore at the walls. She wrote help with her own blood. But the hospital moved on above her. No one came looking. Her name slowly faded from rosters and schedules. Another new nurse took her place. Room 302 disappeared again, waiting for the next shift, waiting for the next curious soul to find a door that should not be there. And inside that room, the thin patient still sits, smiling, because he knows someone new will come. They always do. After all, some tragedies are not written in records, they are carved in walls and whispered in the silence of rooms that were never meant to be opened.